My name is Sophie, I'm 42, and my husband of 15 years decided to end our marriage with a phone call, right after telling me he inherited $800 million. Before I get to the part where he collapsed in a high-end designer shop just 3 days later, I'd love it if you'd let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It's always so cool to see how far these stories can reach. The day it happened was a Tuesday, just a regular, soul-crushingly ordinary Tuesday. I was sitting at my desk in a respectable accounting firm downtown, lost in the predictable and comforting embrace of spreadsheets and financial reports. The whole office had that familiar smell of stale coffee and printer paper. Through my window, the city just kept moving, completely unaware. My whole life was built on that kind of rhythm. It was all about predictability, logic, and that deep, quiet joy you get from making a balance sheet actually balance. Numbers have a way of telling the truth. People, on the other hand, lie. I just had no idea how much. For 15 years, my steady paycheck from my very safe job was the rock we built our lives on, the foundation Richard used to dream up his endless schemes. My phone started buzzing on the desk, rattling against a pile of paperwork. The caller ID showed it was Richard. I smiled, almost without thinking. I figured he was just calling to see how my day was going, or maybe to vent about a difficult client, or to pitch his newest can't-fail business idea. Our marriage had its own rhythm, you see, his wild, chaotic energy against my steady, calming presence. "Hey there," I said, my voice bright and cheery, the sound of a woman who had no idea her world was about to end. "Sophie." His voice was completely devoid of emotion, a cold, flat tone I hadn't heard in years. Not since that time I refused to co-sign on a loan for some ridiculous venture he was obsessed with. It was a voice that had been completely stripped of any warmth or our shared history. "I need you to listen to me, and listen closely. Uncle Edward died." My stomach dropped. Edward was this distant, almost legendary figure in Richard's family, a super wealthy, eccentric old man who lived in a massive estate somewhere near Bordeaux. We'd only met him one time, at a very awkward family function about a decade earlier. "Oh, Richard, I'm so sorry to hear that." "Don't be," he cut me off instantly. That chill in his voice was now mixed with something else, something sharp and almost electric. It was the sound of pure, unfiltered victory. "He left it all to me. The whole thing. We're talking $800 million. I was completely stunned. The number was so huge it didn't even feel real. It was like trying to calculate the distance to a star. That was the kind of money you read about in the news, not the kind of money that happens to people like us. "What? Richard, are you kidding me? How is that even possible?" "Deadly serious," he said, and I could practically hear the arrogant grin spreading across his face. "And things are about to change, and change fast. My life is about to launch into the stratosphere, and to be blunt, you're not on the passenger list." Using a metaphor like that was so cold and impersonal, it felt like he'd physically slapped me. "Flight plan? Richard, what on earth are you talking about? We're married." "Were," he corrected me, and the word felt like a surgeon's scalpel, cleanly severing 15 years of a life we'd built together. "I'm talking about a divorce, Sophie. I've already had a top-tier lawyer draft the papers. I need you to pack a bag and be gone from the apartment by the time I get back tonight." In an instant, the quiet, professional silence of my office became completely suffocating. The perfectly aligned columns of figures on my computer screen swam together into a blurry, meaningless mess. 15 years. 15 years of me staying late at the office to make sure our bills were paid. 15 years of me propping him up after every single one of his failures, reassuring him that his big moment was right around the corner. 15 years of me shrinking myself down so that his massive ego would have more space to expand. And just like that, it was all deleted in a 30-second phone call. "Just leave," I managed to whisper, the words feeling like glass in my throat. My entire universe was spinning off its axis. "That's what I just said," he replied with a snap. All that patience I had so carefully nurtured for more than a decade had vanished completely. "My new life is starting, and I can't have you dragging me down like a dead weight." And then he hung up. I just sat there, frozen, the phone still glued to my ear, listening to the empty hum of the dial tone. It was the most isolating sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my life imploding. I knew I had to go home. I had to face the man who had just fired me from my own marriage. The drive back to our apartment was a battle to keep myself together. My brain, which was usually so neat and organized, was now a chaotic jumble of memories from our life. I saw our wedding day, a small and simple ceremony because it was all we could manage at the time. I remembered him laughing at my 5-year financial plan, teasingly calling me his adorably careful little accountant. I felt the sting of his words from over the years, each one a small chip taken out of my self-esteem. "It's just a job, Sophie. It's not a real career. There's no passion in it." He could never grasp that my passion was for stability, for building something tangible, something that was meant to last. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the steering wheel, the memory of Uncle Edward's visit suddenly rushing back, clearer and more detailed than ever before. Richard had been absolutely unbearable that day, strutting around like a peacock, spewing buzzwords he'd picked up from some business podcast. He had cornered Edward, relentlessly trying to talk to him about stock portfolios and venture capital. Edward just listened with a polite but unreadable smile before finding a reason to excuse himself. A little while later, I found Edward out on the veranda, just looking out at the garden. I had brought him a glass of water, and we just started chatting. He never once asked about Richard. He wanted to know about me. He asked about the specific challenges of my job, about the kind of ethical tightropes an accountant has to walk. We must have talked for almost an hour about financial regulations, corporate responsibility, and the ways that numbers can be twisted to tell very convincing lies. He listened to me with a focus and intensity that made me feel truly understood for the first time in a very long time. "A good accountant is the conscience of a business," he had told me. "It's a job with a profound moral center." Just before they left that day, he discreetly pressed a small, heavy object into my palm. It was a stunning, perfectly clear crystal paperweight. "For your desk," he'd said with a twinkle in his eye. It was meant to remind me that clarity and integrity are the things you can't put a price on, that you should never let anyone take those from you. I still had that little paperweight. It sat on my desk at home, a solid, silent piece of certainty in a life that was suddenly turning to liquid beneath my feet. That memory, popping up right then, felt like some kind of strange foreshadowing. I shook my head, trying to snap back to reality. I had to pull the car over before I called my sister, Emily. My voice was shattered as I told her what had just happened. "He did what?" Her voice ripped through the phone, a sound of pure, protective fury. That thankless, parasitic worm. "I'm coming to get you." "No, scratch that. You get here. Right now. Do not spend one more second in that apartment with that monster. Throw some things in a bag. Only the essentials. Grab your laptop, your important papers, and you know that hideous painting of a boat he's so obsessed with? Leave it behind. We'll handle everything else later." Emily had never been a fan of Richard. She always said he was the kind of guy who enjoyed the shade from a tree he didn't even bother to plant. Hearing her voice, so full of righteous fury on my behalf, was like a lifeline in the middle of a hurricane. It was like she was giving me permission to finally be angry, an emotion I hadn't even let myself process yet. When I walked through the front door of our apartment, it felt like I was in a stranger's home. The air was thick with a new, sickeningly sweet smell, some kind of ridiculously expensive cologne. Richard was there, pacing back and forth in the living room. He was wearing a brand new suit, a perfectly tailored dark navy number I had never seen before. It was the exact type of suit he'd spend hours looking at online, only to complain that he could never afford it. On the coffee table, right next to a bottle of champagne that I knew for a fact cost more than our weekly grocery bill, was a single crisp white envelope, the divorce papers. "You're here," he said. It wasn't a question, just a cold statement. He looked different, taller somehow. The familiar features of his face seemed to have hardened into a mask of pure arrogance. His smile was empty. It never reached his eyes. His eyes were cold and calculating. They were the eyes of someone who'd just hit the jackpot and was now methodically cutting ties with everyone who knew him back when he was broke. "I got your call," I said, and was surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I was determined not to let him see me fall apart. "Good. That saves us some time," he said, gesturing towards the envelope. "It's all very simple. I had my lawyer keep it clean. No alimony. You have your job, after all. We'll split what little savings we have right down the middle. You just walk away. I think I've been more than generous, all things considered." Generous. The word was so twisted and detached from reality it was almost laughable. I looked around the apartment we had made into a home together. I remembered the scuffed hardwood floors we had spent a long, sweaty weekend refinishing ourselves. I saw the bookshelf I had so carefully arranged by genre and then by author. I could still smell the faint hint of lavender from the diffuser I always kept on to soothe his so-called artistic temperament. My entire life was being ripped out from under me, and he had the audacity to call it generosity. 15 years, Richard," I said, my voice quiet, one last attempt to find a single shred of the man I married. "Don't I at least get a real conversation? Don't I deserve an explanation to my face?" He laughed. It was a short, ugly bark of a laugh that seemed to bounce off the walls of the suddenly cavernous room. "A conversation? Sophie, you and I have absolutely nothing left to discuss. Our worlds just aren't compatible anymore. You think in terms of spreadsheets and balanced budgets. I'm about to step into a world of private jets and corporate boardrooms, a world with a completely different caliber of people. You just wouldn't fit in. Your complete lack of ambition would be a liability." And there it was again. My lack of ambition. That was the phrase he had used for years to slowly erode my sense of self-worth. The same ambition that had paid the rent for this roof over our heads. The same ambition that had bankrolled his last 3 failed companies. The same ambition that had kept our heads above water while he was off chasing one fantasy after another. A hot wave of anger rose up my neck, but I forced it back down, compressing it into a cold, hard diamond of sheer will. He wasn't even worth my rage. I walked over to the table, picked up the pen, and stared at the signature line. My name, Sophie Dubose, soon to be just Sophie once more. I thought about all the long nights I had stayed up late, helping him fine-tune business plans. I thought about all the family parties I had to go to by myself because he was supposedly networking. I thought about every sacrifice, every compromise, and all the love I had wasted on this man, and on this marriage. And so it all came down to this, a cold signature on a piece of paper meant to erase me from his life as cleanly as possible. Right before I signed, I locked eyes with him. "You know," I said, "I used to think your greatest fear was failure, but I was wrong. It's being nobody, and you actually believe this money will make you somebody important. But it won't, Richard. It'll just make you rich." I signed my name with a single, sharp stroke. When I looked back up at him, I said, "Enjoy your new fortune, Richard." For a second, he actually looked thrown off by how calm I was, but he recovered in a flash, that familiar sneer creeping back onto his face. "Oh, I will," he shot back. "Now grab your stuff. I've got a realtor waiting to show me a penthouse with a view of the Eiffel Tower in an hour. Time is money, after all." He held the door open, gesturing with obvious impatience as I walked out with just one overnight bag, leaving 15 years of my life behind me. The second that door clicked shut, I didn't feel a wave of sadness. Instead, there was this strange, ice-cold clarity. The man I had married was gone. Or maybe he was never really there to begin with. That first night at my friend Emily's is a total blur of shock and way too much wine. She just let me talk, let me sob, let me just sit there, completely numb. She didn't feed me any cheap platitudes or sell me false hope. She was just there, and that was everything I needed. "The biggest thing he's losing isn't the money he thinks he's about to get," she said, her voice full of fire. "It's you." The next morning, I woke up with a bizarre new sense of purpose. The grief was still sitting on my chest like a lead weight, but right next to it, something else had taken root. A cold, hard sense of resolve. Richard saw me as dead weight. He was convinced I had no ambition. I was going to prove him wrong. But more than that, I was going to prove it to myself. I flipped open my laptop, its familiar glow a small comfort. For years, I had dreamed of taking an advanced certification course in corporate finance and risk management. It was a serious qualification, the kind that swings open doors to executive roles. It was also expensive and incredibly demanding, and Richard had always managed to talk me out of it. "Why bother?" he'd say. "Your little accounting job is stable. Don't go rocking the boat." I found the course online and looked at the tuition fee. It was steep. It would eat up a huge chunk of my half of our savings. For a split second, I froze. The cautious accountant part of my brain was screaming that it was a foolish risk. But then I pictured Richard's sneering face, his voice calling me dead weight. I hit enroll. I punched in my credit card details. I paid the fee. It was the first truly significant decision I had made for myself, and only myself, in a very, very long time. It felt like taking my first full breath after being held underwater for years. For the next 2 days, I completely immersed myself in the study materials. The first module covered forensic accounting, how to sniff out fraud and unravel incredibly complex financial webs. It was like a puzzle, and I had always been good at puzzles. I was waking up a part of my brain that I had let go dormant for far too long. The part of me that loved digging into complex problems, the part that ran on logic and strategy. It was absolutely exhilarating. Meanwhile, the gossip mill was churning, with mutual friends awkwardly trying to figure out where their loyalties now stood. I started hearing stories about Richard's adventures. He'd thrown some over-the-top party at a 5-star hotel, bragging to everyone about his massive inheritance. He'd even put a non-refundable down payment on a brand-new Porsche. He was already playing the part of a millionaire before a single cent had even cleared probate. It was beyond reckless. It was pure arrogance. It was so Richard. On the third day, I was taking a study break when a courier showed up with a letter. It was sent to me at Emily's address. The envelope was made of this thick, creamy cardstock with the name of a prestigious Bordeaux law firm embossed in elegant gold script on the back. My hands were shaking as I tore it open. The wording was stiff and precise. It was an official request for my presence at a meeting regarding the estate and final will of a Mr. Edward Dubose. It specifically said my attendance was crucial for clarifying certain testamentary clauses. A chill went right down my spine. Why on earth were they contacting me? The divorce was fresh, but maybe not totally finalized in the eyes of the law. Was Richard trying to pull some kind of fast one? Was this some obscure legal loophole that would give him a claim to my future income, even my tiny salary? I showed the letter to Emily. Her brow furrowed. "Okay, this is weird," she said. "Testamentary clauses. Why would his uncle's lawyer be contacting you directly? You have to go, but I'm going with you. You are not walking into that alone." That train ride to Bordeaux was pure torture. My mind raced through every possible scenario, and each one was worse than the last. Was Richard going to claim I owed him money? Was this whole thing a legal trap designed to make me sign away even more of my rights? I clutched my purse, where I'd tucked a crystal paperweight for good luck. Its cool, solid feel was a tiny comfort in a life that had suddenly become so fragile and uncertain. The law office was exactly what you'd picture. Old, intimidating, and smelling of leather, wood polish, and centuries of old money. We were led into a huge conference room where a polished mahogany table reflected our nervous faces. A stern-faced man in a perfectly cut suit stood and introduced himself as Monsieur Leblanc, Edward's personal attorney for over 40 years. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, madame," he said, his voice formal and completely unreadable. "I have to admit, I was surprised to get your letter," I managed to say, my voice sounding way calmer than I felt. "My former husband, Richard, is the beneficiary of his uncle's will." Monsieur Leblanc simply adjusted his glasses. He looked at me with a completely neutral expression, which was somehow more unnerving than a frown. "That is precisely what we are here to discuss," he stated. "Mr. Dubose's will is unconventional. It contains a number of stipulations, certain contingent clauses that must be resolved before the estate can be officially settled." My heart was pounding against my ribs. Stipulations. Mr. Dubose stipulated in a private codicil that his heir must not only be a blood relative, but must also prove to have a character of integrity, prudence, and a grasp of the true value of wealth, not just its monetary worth. The lawyer's voice never wavered. To that end, Mr. Dubose set up a character assessment protocol before now. I just stared at him, completely baffled. A character assessment? Indeed, he said, pausing to let his words hang in the air. A test, you could say. He needed to be sure his life's work would become a legacy, not just a lottery ticket. However, there is someone else who can explain this much better than I can. He gave a slight nod toward a large oak door at the side of the room. The door swung open, and in walked Uncle Edward. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't dead. He was very much alive, looking quite sharp in a tweed jacket, with a wry, almost apologetic smile playing on his lips. I let out a sharp gasp. Emily squeezed my hand so tight I thought the bones might snap. My head was spinning, desperately trying to put the pieces together. "Sophie," Edward said, and his voice was warm and familiar, cutting right through my confusion. "It is so good to see you again. Please forgive all the theatrics. It was, I promise you, a necessary evil." I couldn't get a word out. I just stared at him, my mind a complete whirlwind of questions. "You see," Edward went on, taking a seat at the head of the table, "I've known for a very long time that my nephew Richard saw me not as family, but as a walking, talking bank account. I don't have any children of my own, and I just couldn't stand the thought of my life's work, everything I built from absolutely nothing, being thrown away by a greedy, foolish young man. So I created a test." He looked directly at me, his eyes kind but incredibly sharp, the kind of eyes that don't miss a thing. My lawyer informed Richard of my passing and the inheritance. I wanted to see what he'd do. Would he mourn me? Would he be responsible? Would he honor the woman who had been by his side for 15 years, the one constant in his life? He let out a deep, disappointed sigh. He failed, spectacularly. He showed his true colors with a speed and a cruelty that, frankly, shocked even me. For the mere promise of money, he threw away the single most valuable asset he ever had. He paused, and his eyes met mine, holding my gaze. "And then there was you, Sophie. You, the woman he called unambitious. You, the one he tossed aside without a moment's hesitation. In the one real conversation we ever had years ago, you spoke with so much passion about ethics, about corporate responsibility. You understood that a balance sheet also tells the story of a company's moral compass. You have shown more grace, dignity, and integrity in the face of his cruelty than he has displayed in his entire life." Monsieur Leblanc cleared his throat and slid a new set of documents across the table toward me. They were thick, bound together with a blue ribbon. According to the final, binding codicil of Mr. Dubose's will, which has been activated by Richard's definitive failure of the character assessment protocol, the sole and undisputed heir to the entire Dubose fortune, all $800 million, the properties and the controlling interest in Dubose Enterprises, is you, Sophie. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the wild, frantic beating of my own heart. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was the validation. It was the stunning, earth-shattering realization that someone, somewhere, had seen my real worth all along. The quiet dedication, the unwavering loyalty, the integrity that Richard had always made fun of. This man I barely knew, had seen it all and decided it was priceless. As I was trying to wrap my head around this impossible new reality, my phone, which I'd left face down on the table, buzzed. It was a text from a mutual friend. I glanced down at the screen. It was a photo. It showed Richard on his knees in the middle of a sparkling Porsche dealership. His face was just a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. The caption underneath read, "OMG, Richard's credit card was just declined for $1 million car. He's screaming at someone on the phone. Oh my God, I think he just collapsed." The test was officially over. His brand new life had fizzled out before it even got started. My own life, the one I had just begun to shape for myself, was about to be twisted in ways I couldn't possibly have foreseen. The very first thing I did was block Richard's number. The avalanche of frantic texts and desperate voicemails that came after, a sad, escalating spiral of threats, apologies, and pleas, was just noise I no longer had room for in my life. I didn't need some big final showdown. His own behavior was the only judgment that mattered. My quiet was my power. Edward turned out to be more than just a savior. He became my mentor, my friend, and the father I never really had. He was absolutely thrilled to find out that my boring old accounting skills were the exact thing he needed to organize his entire business empire. He saw the sharp, strategic mind that Richard had tried so desperately to suffocate. He brought me to his grand estate, not as a visitor, but as a genuine partner. We spent weeks poring over the business, and for the first time, I felt my professional skills were not just appreciated, but actually celebrated. He then offered to legally adopt me, to give me the family name that was tied to the fortune. I accepted. I became Sophie Dubose, not through marriage, but on my own merit. The next several years were an absolute whirlwind of intense work and amazing discoveries. I didn't go out and buy a penthouse or a sports car. The first huge check I ever wrote was to pay off Emily's entire mortgage, a tear-soaked, incredible moment that felt richer than any luxury good ever could. The second was to launch a foundation. That was 5 years ago. The Dubose Clarity Foundation, named after the paperweight that kicked this whole thing off, is now my life's mission. We give seed money, low-interest loans, and mentorship to women over 40 who are ready to build their own businesses. We invest in the overlooked dreamers, the steady hands, the women who've been told their best years are behind them. I get to witness the look in their eyes when someone finally puts faith in them. It's a look I recognize intimately. We invest in women who have walked in my shoes, and I did find love again. His name is Antoine, a kind, brilliant architect I met while we were designing the new headquarters for our foundation. He loves me for my intellect, my passion, and for the truly awful jokes I tell when I'm wiped out. He was drawn to the work I was doing long before he knew anything about the scale of my wealth. Our relationship is a partnership of true equals, creating something new together. As for Richard, I heard through the grapevine that he eventually sorted out his debts after filing for bankruptcy. He relocated to a small town up north, landed a humble job managing a local charity, and married a schoolteacher named Julia. Emily actually saw him once, coaching a kid's soccer team on a Saturday morning. She told me he looked content, quiet, and somehow smaller without all his usual bravado. I hope he is. I hope losing it all finally taught him what things are truly valuable. Sometimes I look at that crystal paperweight on my desk, here in my large, sun-filled office overlooking the city. It's a reminder that money doesn't change you, it just makes you more of who you already are. For Richard, it magnified his insecurity and greed. For me, it magnified a strength I was only just beginning to see in myself. He thought $800 million would buy him a new beginning, but all it did was show the world how poor his character truly was. And for me, losing absolutely everything was the only way I could ever truly have it all. Thank you all so much for listening to my story. It's still surreal to think about how much can pivot in a single moment. I have to ask you, have you ever had an experience, big or small, that revealed someone's true colors in a way you never expected? Let me know down in the comments. I would absolutely love to read your stories. And if you enjoyed this, please hit that like button and subscribe for more. It honestly helps so much.